I bought a coffin and something was already inside. I collect strange and unusual antiques, but I think I may have made a mistake with my latest purchase. I bought this, an antique safety coffin from the 19th century. It was designed with all these strange levers and tubes to help someone escape if they were buried alive. I was fascinated by the history until I got it home. Because a few hours ago I heard a sound that meant one of its bizarre life-saving mechanisms was already being used. Section 1. The Collector's Fascination. My hobby is collecting objects that tell a story, especially those that whisper of a forgotten time, of fears and hopes we've mostly packed away. So when I saw this piece come up for auction, I knew I had to have it. The listing called it an 1880s life-indicating burial case, a safety coffin. Now, if you don't know, the 18th and 19th centuries were gripped by a very specific, very visceral terror, taphophobia, the fear of being buried alive. It wasn't entirely irrational either. Medical science was still finding its feet, and stories of people waking up in their own graves were all over the newspapers. Even George Washington, on his deathbed, ordered that his body not be put in a vault for 3 days, just to be absolutely sure. This fear gave birth to an entire industry of morbid ingenuity. Inventors across Europe and America patented dozens of designs for safety coffins. Some had ropes tied to bells above ground, while others had flags, ladders, even pyrotechnics. They were all built to answer one terrifying question. What if you wake up and it's too late? This coffin was a work of art. Dark, rich mahogany with tarnished brass fittings. But it didn't just have a simple bell. Its design was more complex. The auction notes mentioned a patent from a John G. Krischbaum, dated December 5th, 1882. His invention, patent number 268693, involved a T-shaped pipe placed near the hands of the person inside. A slight turn of the hands would rotate the pipe, which would then move an indicator above ground, and more importantly, allow air to flow down into the coffin. I was captivated. It was a perfect piece of Gothic history, a machine built to cheat the Grim Reaper. I won the auction. It cost a small fortune, but I didn't care. I was bringing home a story. I just didn't realize that story was still being written. Getting it home was an ordeal. It was heavy. Far heavier than I expected for an empty wooden box. We finally wrestled it into my study, my personal museum of curiosities. I placed it against the far wall, and for a few hours, it was just that. A beautiful, silent relic. Section 2. The First Anomaly. The house grew quiet as evening fell. I was standing in the doorway of the study, admiring it one last time before bed. The coffin was shrouded in shadows, its brass fittings catching the dim hallway light. And that's when I heard it. It was so faint I almost dismissed it. A tiny click. I froze, listened. Nothing. I shook my head, smiling a little. This house is old. It groans and settles. Just the floorboards. An overactive imagination, probably, fueled by handling a coffin all day. I turned to leave. Thump, click. That time it was clearer. Not a creak, not a groan. It was mechanical, rhythmic. I stood there, every muscle tense, just waiting for it to happen again. A minute passed. Nothing. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Okay. You're officially letting this get to you. It's a box. An old, empty box. I forced myself to walk away, but my mind was stuck in that room. Suddenly, my own home felt wrong. The house itself seemed to be holding its breath, listening with me. Every normal sound was intrusive. Was that it again? No. Was that? No. I tried to tell myself I was being ridiculous. I'm a collector. I deal with objects of death all the time. But this was different. Those gothic tales that once seemed romantic and distant now felt uncomfortably close. There's a term for it. The uncanny. That feeling when something familiar becomes deeply strange. A coffin is a familiar object in my collection, but this one was becoming foreign. Before I try to figure out what that sound is, and honestly, before I completely lose my nerve, if you're into strange history and mysteries like this, you should probably subscribe. I have a bad feeling this story isn't over. Section 3. The investigation. I couldn't sleep. That sound just kept replaying in my head. Thump, click. It had a cadence, a purpose. Around 2 in the morning, I couldn't take it anymore. Armed with nothing but a heavy flashlight, I went back to the study. My heart was pounding as I stood in the doorway. I swept the beam of light across the room, finally letting it rest on the coffin. It looked just as I'd left it. Silent, imposing. I took a hesitant step inside. The floorboards under my feet were deafeningly loud. I held my breath and listened. For a long, long minute, there was only the sound of my own blood rushing in my ears. And then, thump, click. It was coming from the coffin. There was no doubt now. It was soft, but it was undeniable. I crept closer, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, and lowered my ear to the cold, polished wood. The sound was clearer here, resonating through the dense frame. Thump, click. Thump, click. It was a slow, deliberate rhythm, like a clock, but failing. My fear was suddenly overtaken by analytical curiosity. This isn't a ghost story. This is a mechanical problem. I shone the light on the brass fixtures, my mind racing back to the Krischbaum patent. I traced the path of the mechanism from the diagram. There was the small, sealed glass porthole at the top, and there, near where the hands would rest, was the external housing for that T-shaped pipe. It all looked inert, untouched for over a century. But the patent had mentioned an indicator. On this coffin, it was a simple dial on the exterior. I focused my flashlight on it. It was a small brass disc set flush against the wood, with a single engraved line. It was supposed to be vertical. It wasn't. It was turned just a few degrees to the right. And as I stared, I saw it move. With another faint thump click from inside, the disc shuddered, trying to turn another fraction of a millimeter. My blood ran cold. The sound wasn't a ghost. It wasn't my imagination. It was the sound of a device designed for one purpose and one purpose only, to be used by someone trapped inside. The rhythmic thump-click was the sound of the internal handle, engaged by a hand, trying and failing to turn. Someone or something had been turning that handle. Section 4. The unsettling reality. I stumbled back, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. It's impossible. This is an antique from the 1880s. Nothing could have survived in there. Nothing. And yet, the sound persisted. Thump, click. A slow, patient, and desperate heartbeat in the silence of my home. My collector's fascination had curdled into a thick, primal dread. This object was no longer a piece of history. It was active. The story I thought I was collecting was suddenly a story I was in. I thought about those old accounts from the 19th century that I used to read with academic interest. Stories of exhumed coffins with scratch marks on the inside of the lid. Tales of bodies found horribly contorted. They weren't just folklore. They were documented fears based on real uncertainties. The entire purpose of this coffin, this machine, was to be a fail-safe against a terrible mistake. It was a box of hope, built to fight back against the silence of the absolute night. But what happens when that hope arrives more than a century too late? What happens when the mechanism designed to bring rescue is only now, after 140 years, grinding its gears in the dark? That rhythmic sound feels like a question, a plea. Every few seconds, it reminds me that the core function of this object, a life-saving device, is in use. Conclusion. I'm standing in the doorway of my study now, just looking at it. The first light of dawn is starting to filter through the windows, but it doesn't make the room feel any warmer. The sound is still there. Thump, click. It's weaker now, more spaced out, but it hasn't stopped. What is in there? Is it just the echo of a long-past tragedy, somehow imprinted on the mechanism? Or is it something else? Something that was put inside and has been waiting? I have no idea what to do. Every instinct is screaming at me to lock this door and get this thing out of my house. But another part of me, the part that heard that desperate mechanical plea, keeps asking a different question. What if there's something or someone that needs to get out? What would you do? Do I try to force it open? Do I call someone? And who would I even call? Tell me what you would do in the comments. Seriously, I need to figure out what to do next.